Radhe Radhe, friends. Imagine people trapped in the snow for months, starving with hunger, and forced to make an impossible decision just to stay alive. When the rescue team finally arrived, they didn't find only frozen bodies. They found evidence that shocked the entire United States. This is not just the story of a tragedy, but the most heartbreaking tale of human courage, hope, and the final struggle to survive. What exactly happened that turned a journey filled with hope into one of the most horrifying survival stories in history? Let's find out from the very beginning. In 1846, many families across the United States left their old homes behind, dreaming of starting a new life in California, and began preparing for the journey. At that time, California was considered the land of opportunity, where fertile land, a better future, and countless hopes for a new beginning awaited those who could reach it. Gradually, families from different states joined the same wagon train, making the journey larger than ever before. The wagon train included young children, women, elderly people, farmers, merchants, and young men, all hoping to build a better future for their families. Each wagon was carefully loaded with clothes, grain, tools, weapons, and enough food supplies for several months to ensure a safe journey. Everyone believed there would be hardships along the way, but once they reached their destination, all of their struggles would finally come to an end. The journey began with great excitement. Children played along the way while the adults moved forward, discussing their plans for the future. Throughout the day, the wagon train moved forward slowly, and every night everyone gathered around campfires to cook food and prepare for the next day's journey. For several weeks, everything seemed completely normal, and no one realized that fate had written something entirely different for them. Along the way, they met a group of travelers who told them about a new and shorter route. They claimed that this new route would save many days of travel and allow them to reach California before the other wagon trains. The route had been suggested by a man who assured them that it was safe, shorter, and would save valuable time. Some experienced travelers did not immediately trust this advice because no one had complete knowledge of the route. But the desire to reach their destination sooner convinced most of the families to take the risk, and they chose the new route. They had absolutely no idea that this single decision would change their lives forever and become a permanent part of history. As the wagon train continued along the new route, the path became more difficult and dangerous with every passing mile. The wagons repeatedly became stuck in the dense forests. Clearing the path took hours, and their progress became slower and slower. With each passing day, their food supplies were consumed more rapidly, while their destination was still far away. For the first time, they realized that they might have made a decision that could cost them everything. But this was only the beginning, because the real disaster was waiting for them in the snow-covered mountains of the Sierra Nevada. The new route, which had been described as easy, turned out to be the exact opposite, bringing new hardships with every passing day. In the dense forests, they had to cut down trees. They had to clear their own path in many places, making their journey far slower than they had expected. Several wagons became stuck in deep ruts. Wheels began to break, and they were forced to leave behind many of their valuable belongings along the way. Time kept slipping away, but their destination was still far ahead, and winter was drawing closer with each passing day. Some experienced travelers advised turning back, but after coming so far, no one wanted to give up on their dream. Eventually, after struggling through the difficult terrain, the wagon train reached the towering snow-covered mountains of the Sierra Nevada. They believed that within a few more days, they would cross the mountains and safely reach the valleys of California. But that very night, the weather changed so suddenly that no one in the wagon train could have imagined what was about to happen. The sky filled with dark clouds, and within a short time, such a heavy snowfall began that people could no longer see even the person standing in front of them. The next morning, when they opened the doors of their wagons, they found several feet of snow covering everything around them. They tried to move their oxen forward, but with every step, the animals sank deeper into the snow, making any further progress impossible. Many people worked together to clear the path, But the relentless snowfall erased all of their hard work within just a few hours.
Now they had only two choices left: either stay where they were and wait for the weather to change, or risk death by moving forward. In the end, they decided to temporary shelters and remain where they were, believing that the snow would melt soon. But they had no idea that the snow would trap them there, not for days, but for several months.
Gradually, their food supplies began to run low, and every family started eating only half as much in order to preserve what little grain they had left. The children cried from hunger, while their parents gave them their own share of food and went to sleep with empty stomachs. Within just a few weeks, all the feed for their oxen and horses was completely gone, and their animals also began to grow weak. Then someone made a suggestion that left the entire wagon train in complete silence, because the real fight for survival had finally begun. Their food supplies were almost completely exhausted, so they first killed their oxen and horses and tried to preserve their meat for as many days as possible. Some families boiled animal hides and ate them, while others even boiled their leather shoes in water in an attempt to satisfy their hunger. Hunger was no longer affecting only their bodies. It was slowly beginning to change the way they thought and the decisions they made. Every morning, the sound of crying could be heard from one of the shelters, because the freezing cold and hunger had claimed another life during the night. The children were growing weaker every day, while many of the elderly no longer had the strength to endure the cold and starvation. Everyone in the camp understood that if help did not arrive soon, perhaps none of them would survive. With that hope, some of the strongest members decided to risk crossing the snow to bring back help. In December 1846, a small group of 17 people set out on foot through the deep snow, later becoming known as the Forlorn Hope. They carried only a small amount of food, makeshift snowshoes, and one hope: to somehow reach other people. But the mountain snow was far deeper than they had expected, and every step brought them closer to death. After walking for days, all of their remaining food was completely gone, and continuing forward became almost impossible. The hunger had become so unbearable that several people collapsed onto the snow while walking and never got up again. The very people who had been encouraging one another were now struggling to take their final breaths. Then the group was forced to face a decision between life and humanity that no one could ever have imagined. They argued for hours, prayed, and searched for another solution, but every hope slowly disappeared. In the end, some of them made the most painful and horrifying decision to survive, by relying on the bodies of their deceased companions. This decision was not driven by greed or cruelty, but by many days of hunger, freezing cold, and hope that had been completely shattered. But they had no idea that the families left behind at the camp were facing an even more horrifying situation. Meanwhile, the families trapped in the main camp looked toward the sky every morning, hoping that help would finally arrive that day. But with every passing day, the snow grew deeper, while the last remaining pieces of food slowly disappeared. Many families now had nothing left to eat, and the children began fainting as they cried from hunger. Mothers continued comforting their children, saying that help would arrive soon, even though they themselves were no longer sure of it. Some people made one last attempt to survive by boiling tree bark, roots, and the remaining animal bones to fill their stomachs. But against the relentless cold and constant hunger, none of it could keep their bodies alive for much longer. Gradually, more people began to die in the camp, and with every new morning, another member of a family was gone forever. The most heartbreaking part was that the survivors could not even bury their loved ones because the ground was completely frozen. Meanwhile, some of the people who had gone in search of help finally managed to reach a human settlement after many days of difficult travel. They were in such terrible condition that at first no one believed their story. When people learned the truth about the families trapped in the mountains, a rescue team was immediately organized and sent toward the mountains. But the route was extremely dangerous, so the rescue team could not reach everyone at once. During the first rescue mission, only a few women and children could be brought to safety, while the others had to be left behind. Those who remained behind were once again faced with the same question: how would they survive until the next rescue team arrived?
Hunger had returned in an even more terrifying form, and death was drawing closer with each passing day.
When the second rescue team finally returned several weeks later, the scene at the camp was so horrifying that even the experienced rescuers stood in shock for several moments. Several shelters had been completely buried beneath the snow, while inside others, the struggle between life and death was still continuing. The rescuers began searching each shelter one by one, and everyone they found alive was immediately wrapped in warm blankets. Some people had become so weak that they had not been able to stand for days and could barely speak. But the greatest shock came when the rescue team discovered evidence scattered throughout the camp that revealed the truth behind the entire tragedy. The investigation revealed that, after being overcome by hunger, several people had tried to save their lives by relying on the bodies of their deceased companions. The news shocked the entire United States, because no one had imagined that ordinary families could ever be driven to such circumstances. If the wagon train had stayed on the old and safer route, they might have reached California before winter began. In total, nearly half of the people lost their lives during the journey, while the survivors carried the pain of that tragic experience for the rest of their lives. If you enjoy true mystery stories and historical events like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you again in the next story.